I got the heart of a lion that can't be tamed. I got the blood of a champion in my veins. And if I fall, I'm gonna get up again. I will be triumphant.
Hello, and welcome to Radiant Spirit, a podcast about sobriety, self love, and living your most authentic life. I'm Jennifer Gibbons, and today, episode 3. Thanks for joining me for my third episode. Today, I am going to be sharing my personal story, my story of addiction, but mostly kind of just an outline of my life story, if you will, but mostly highlighting my addiction, those tendencies that started arriving in my life very early, and like the trauma behind it, but not going to dwell too much on the trauma aspect of it. We all have our own trauma. It kind of makes us who we are and is all a part of our spiritual journey, the lessons that we're here to learn. So yeah, like I said, on that note of being my most authentic self, for some reason coming up to this, I have shared my personal story of addiction multiple times in AA meetings, no problem. And I would get kind of nervous, especially the first couple times nervous, but towards the last few times doing it, it's no big deal. I've done this before. I know I'm in a room full of people that have made equally poor decisions in their addictions. So I don't, that sense of judgment that you might feel, or shame, that shame is just lifted in that environment. So I think being on this in this environment and here on this platform, it's a totally different feeling for me, and really trying to sit with and like acknowledge the shame that's coming up for me, and really asking myself, what is this resistance, what is this fear, and realizing, like, wow, this is really just putting myself out there. But to be fair, this is what I am going to be asking of other people with similar stories on their journeys of spiritual awakening and recovery. So, it seems only fair and only right that I share my own juicy deets here before bringing other people onto this podcast. So, yeah, I yeah, where to begin? So I guess we're going to begin at the beginning. Unfortunately, I have a little bit of an outline from the last time I spoke in an AA meeting. So hopefully I won't be going on too many tangents. I can keep it on point. Um, but yeah, so I grew up in Rancho Cordova, California. We moved there. Well, that's where most of my school and everything there. I kind of my early years before kindergarten, my family kind of bounced around. We were in Central California, and then moved up to Sacramento when I was probably kindergarten, first grade. I think first grade is when we moved to Sacramento. So most of my school years, actually all of my school years, except for kindergarten, which was in Visalia, California, Central California, was all in the Sacramento area. And my family settled into Rancho Cordova, which is a suburb of Sacramento. Most of the time I was in school. I think I did like a year of first grade in another school district, but for the most part, I was in the same school district, kind of surrounded by a similar group of peers growing up. So yeah, so throughout school, and I my parents are still happily married, which I know is unusual these days, and these day and age, or this day and age, if you will. But so yeah, growing up, I always had both of my parents, both mom and dad. And I have one sibling. I have one brother who is 18 months younger than me. So we're pretty close in age. And yeah, we've always been pretty close. One of those really tight-knit relationships, like we either really love each other or really hate each other, which I think is pretty common for siblings around the same age range, But so growing up, I was always a people pleaser. I was always an overachiever. I often think back on how it was for me growing up, and I think to like my school years. And there's this one episode of The Simpsons where like school is shut down for like snow or something like that, but Lisa is just freaking out and she just needs this validation. And she like, please give me an A. She comes up to Marge shaking this paper that she wrote that no one's gonna ever see, and Marge is just like, okay, and writes an A on it. But that very much reminds me of how I was growing up. I needed that constant validation. So that's, yeah, that early on, I always needed that. So overachiever, really good student. And that carried my, that was very much my vibe all the way through school. Now, something that happened to me, I don't like the way that sounded, something that happened to me. A part of my story, when I was 14, I made a really bad decision. And although, I made a decision that a lot of 14-year-olds make, and I chose to sneak out of the house and go to a little party. I was going over to a friend's house. There was a party right next door to my friend's house. Didn't really know who was going to be there or what, but that was what happened. So I snuck out. I went to my friend's house. We went next door, went to this party. Yeah, not to dwell too much on the trauma, but I was raped at that party, and I was a virgin at the time. I was also raised in my church community. So I very much had the beliefs of my church, and knowing very well the 10 Commandments, knowing, oh my God, sneaking out of the house, disobeying my parents. First off, I knew I was going to hell for that one, right? But everybody else was doing it. But once that incident happened, and knowing that I had had sex outside of marriage, not really at that age grasping consent versus not consent, or lack thereof. That's not something they really talk about in church. Yeah, that's not really an issue. So to me, in my mind, after that incident and that night, I knew with every ounce of my being that I was going to burn in hell. And so I was 14. I had just turned 14 when that happened. And I'm going to say there was a couple years of my life, 14 through 16-ish, probably when things really, like, if you will, the shit hit the fan and my trauma kind of came out within my family. And then that was a whole nother set of traumatic events following that. But yeah, for 2 years, when I was 14 to 16, I was in such a dark depression. I can even see it on my face when I look back at photos of myself from that time frame. I can tell those were the ages, because there is just such a dark, yeah, a dark hopelessness that you can see in my eyes. And it still just breaks my heart to see myself in pictures. There might be a smile on my face, but my heart was dead. Not that our hearts die or anything, but yeah, you can see it. You can see that that instance was taking a toll on me. It was eating me from the inside out. And I did start to, I'm sure within my life, I started to exhibit at least signs of depression. That was probably just interpreted as typical teenage angst, because I kept that very much to myself, and I was reacting in other ways that were just cries for help. But that was so long ago, it's hard to remember all the specifics on that. But yeah, it made for a rough few years, and then that came to light. And I did tell my parents what had happened. And then the panic that happened and the way that was handled within my family. Yeah, like my mom, being a nurse, was very convinced that I might have AIDS. And this was, in the early 90s. That's what everybody was terrified of. And so the clinical process that happened after that was also very traumatic. I still have a hard time with that. When I'm in a doctor's office, those moments still come up to me. Man, yeah, lots of things that I really just I kept it all bottled up. I was bursting at the seams with just wanting to scream at the world by this time. And at this point I was only 16. So, but I was an overachiever. I got my personal high, if you will, from validation, doing well in school, overachieving in every way possible. I was also a singer, and so very active in my church. But I really loved the music aspect of church and being able to sing. That was my happy place growing up. So yeah, so I graduated with really good grades, and was thinking, okay, I am off. This is my chance for independence. When I graduated, I was going to do 1 year of community college, as per my parents' recommendation. And then from there, I was planning to go on to university. So, and had earned what I think probably a pretty small scholarship for the National Choral Award for Northern California, which was, yeah, that was my jam. I was going to go to university and I was going to sing that, like, that was going to be my life. Yeah, didn't really put a whole lot of thought into that other than I think on it now. And really, it was like, that was the only thing I knew I was good at. So it's like, you have to choose your college career now. That was the only thing I knew I could do. So music naturally is what I chose. So, yeah, 18 years old. I feel like the world is my oyster, right? Well, 1 month, I believe, 1 month into my first semester at community college, my mom, who was the main breadwinner of the household, was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And this again was in the 90s. So she was not expected to make it. We didn't really know what to expect with that, but they certainly knew less then than they know now. So it was a very scary time, and yeah, my entire family was living in a constant state of fear at that point, and me being 18, 19, I think I was 18 at the time when my parents sat me down and told me that, yeah, we're not going to be able to afford to send you to university. um yeah, my 19, 18-year-old self acted very much that age and was pissed off at the world. The world is out to get me. Nothing is ever going to work out for me. Why did I work so hard? I busted my butt taking, the classes offered before school and after school, and just overachieve until I just, like, I'm losing sleep every night because it's gonna work out for me in the end, right? This was where my world came crashing down around me, and I realized, oh, all of that hard work was for freaking nothing. Is what I told myself. Not that, like, any of the work we're putting into ourselves is ever for nothing. These are all lessons. Everything we do, there's a reason behind it. I believe this. I know this now. But 19-year-old me, no, I wanted to burn the world to the freaking ground. And I was 19. I was not legally old enough to drink. So, um, yeah, that time frame before the end of that school year, I decided to take up on an offer. There was a young man in one of my Spanish class, I believe, that was a bouncer at one of the local clubs, one of the local exotic dancing clubs, and yeah, I was super naive, but he had given me a bet. It was, I believe it was a bet. It was to come and just try this out as a cocktail waitress, work for 2 nights. It was like over one weekend. And he told me, if you don't make $1,000, I think is what it was. If you don't make $1,000 in this weekend, then I'll pay that to you, and no one will ever, we won't speak of this again. No one will ever know. Well, to me at that point, that was more than I could wrap my brain around. And I saw that as, oh my God, that's my opportunity to go to college. This is it. If I want to go to college, I'm gonna have to pay for it myself. Already I was working like 2 or 3 jobs, and probably 2 restaurant jobs, or one retail, one restaurant, and taking 17 units in college. So sleep was not something I was doing a lot of. I was not, as many people, I think, growing up in the 80s and 90s, self-care was not a thing. Like, you valued yourself based on your output. Sleep, taking care of yourself, those things were seen as weakness. Those are very much things I'm retraining my brain now to know that it is okay to honor and take care of yourself and not work yourself to the bone. I did not know those things when I was that age. So yes, that led to a very brief stint as an exotic dancer. I believe I did that for about a year, maybe less. I don't know, about a year. But it was not long before taking on that job. And as many people will tell you in that industry, sure, I started and got hired as a cocktail waitress. It was within a week I was dancing on stage, and they really train you that way. You're really groomed to be like that. So very common in that industry. So um, now, being that I was now working in these clubs and not telling my family, obviously, I did not tell my family about that. I was still living at home when I was doing this. Um, yeah, I think on those nights I was working because I would come home smelling like cigarettes because that was when you could smoke in clubs. I told my parents I was going out to the clubs that night. So those were just my nights to go out and dance um, in a whole different meaning. However, um, yeah, so in the clubs and quickly, like I was not able to get the courage to go through a night until I had a pill of ecstasy. And that was my first drug of choice, was ecstasy. And there was another woman there that always had it with her, and it was pretty common in that scene, certainly in that club that I was working at. Um, and yeah, it became to where I wouldn't show up for my shift unless I knew the girl with ecstasy was going to be there, because there was no way I was going through another 8 hours of that without being high as a kite. So that was my first addiction. And then I feel like it was a few months in to doing ecstasy at every shift that I got introduced to meth. And I went, oh, wow, you get a lot more bang for your buck, as far as, yeah, the more bang for your buck. It's like, if you're not familiar with meth, it's like a, wow. Yeah. I want to say like the dirty cousin of cocaine. um, it gets you high for a really long time. And that was what I learned would get me through not only one of my shifts, but I could actually study and do pull all nighters and actually get good grades in college. This was my magic. I was like, oh my God, this is how people handle this kind of workload. Obviously, everybody must be doing this. This is the only way to adult. And certainly with the workload that I had on my lap, it seemed like this was the only way this was going to work. So, because I was killing myself, I was running myself into the ground. But um, yeah, those drugs got a hold of me real quick, real quick. And I remember, so I believe I was 19 years old. It's coming up on Christmas time. My mom going through chemo, super sick. Um, and I had moved out at this point, and I got my own apartment. By the time my addiction switched to meth, I was out on my own. So my parents did not see me as I was coming and going. It was my first time in my life having ultimate freedom, if you will. And I didn't handle that well. I made really poor choices. So I want to say a few months into my meth addiction, when it evolved from ecstasy to meth, Christmas time rolled up. And so, of course, I'm going to go to my parents' house. We're doing the whole Christmas thing. Jim, it was just my mom and dad and brother and I. And I think at this point, a couple of times, my brother, I had called him when I needed drugs because I knew he could get them for me. He was certainly more into that scene than I ever was all through high school and stuff. So it was like, he probably knows somebody, right? So he knew. My brother totally knew what was going on with me. But this occasion when I showed up at Christmas, I was like, I remember my mom putting me on the scale, and I was like 85 pounds. Now, not long ago, when I graduated from high school, I was a healthy, muscular 120 pounds. Like, I was very healthy. I'm not very tall. I've always been kind of muscular and stocky. So, I mean, I wouldn't say stocky. I've always been very muscular. So, yeah, when I showed up for Christmas, and my mom and dad had, seen little snippets of me, but this was the first time seeing me probably in, maybe a month, 6 weeks, something like that. Um, my mom was freaking out and put me on the scale, and I was 85 pounds, like I said. So they knew something was wrong. And I don't know what happened the rest of that day, but I feel like my parents probably cornered my brother and were like, what the fuck is happening with Jen? That, like, you must know something, because they knew he'd been over to my apartment, things like that. So, and again, my brother and I have always had a pretty close relationship either. Yeah. So, yeah, they knew something was wrong. And I think they ended up finding out that, yes, in fact, and confirming through my brother that I was doing drugs. So the day after Christmas, my parents showed up nice and early at my apartment. I want to say it was like 6 in the morning, but I don't really know. But they showed up super early at my apartment, ransacked the place looking for drugs. And I'm thinking, you guys, yesterday was Christmas. First off, I buy a day at a time, and you best believe that I did that all. So I was out. I believe they might have found a little bit of weed. I wasn't really into the weed at that point, but um, whatever. If they did find any weed, they flushed it, but I don't think they found anything, if I remember correctly. But at that point, my parents offered me a freaking lifeline. They said, "We will send you to rehab." At that point, had I known how expensive rehab facilities were and what it was my parents were actually offering, oh my God, I should have jumped on that. But did I? Oh, no, no, no. I was 19. I was like, I am an adult. I don't have to do what you people tell me anymore. You told me if I worked hard, I'd get to go to college, and that didn't work out. So I declined the offer, and my parents at that point had co-signed for my vehicle. So when they left, they took the vehicle with them, as they should have. Definitely a smart move on their behalf. But that meant I had no transportation, and no transportation meant I could not get to my job anymore, and no job means no more drugs. So even though I did not go to a rehab facility at that point, I did end up detoxing out of just, I was basically forced to. And I remember sitting in my dark apartment, just knowing that at the end of the month, I wasn't going to be able to pay rent again, and I had to get the heck out of there. Um, so I just sat in my apartment for a month with just, I remember chain smoking in the dark, watching Natural Born Killers on HBO, because that was what was playing that January. And yeah, for the most of January, I just sat and cried my eyes out in my apartment, detoxing from meth. Um, and at that point, I've been kind of talking to one of the bouncers at the club. And it was just something I was like flirting with him when I was on shift, things like that. And then we started talking on the phone, and paging each other. This was before cell phones, or I certainly didn't have a cell phone yet anyway. They were just making their way out. But this gentleman I was speaking to, who ended up being my boyfriend for, I want to say, about a year and a half after that. But um, he was very adamant that he did not like tweakers, couldn't handle, no. And he and his crew were all growing weed. So they were the very opposite spectrum of what that whole meth life looks like. It was very much the weed life. And I had no knowledge of any of that, but I needed a place to live. And I really thought this guy was cute. So and he was being really nice, offering to give me rides places and things like that. And um, I believe our relationship probably progressed faster than it should have, because of my manipulating the situation to get a place to live. I knew I was running out of time, and he happened to be moving in with the people he was living with, some friends from high school, and I believe his uncle. They were all moving into this townhouse together. And it sure enough was right when I was getting kicked out of my apartment, or that was going to line up. So um, fancy that, we all moved in together. And when I think on that time, as icky as some of that really feels, the way I was living my life, big picture, that move saved my freaking life. Switching my addiction from meth to weed. Sweet Mary Jane saved my life from meth, for sure. Absolutely. I have no doubt in my mind of that. And while that served a purpose for a time, obviously that wasn't sustainable. But yeah, like, I needed that switch. And as rough as that whole relationship ended up being, mostly because I was a freaking 20-year-old twat, let's be real. Yeah, I was an addict, and acted as such. I have a lot of regrets for how I treated that young man. And yeah, I tried to live my life as a living amends, but that is one person that that comes up for me, and I deeply regret how that all went down, and understand very much that transition saved my life. Certainly the meth would have killed me. Absolutely. So yeah, that all was before I turned 21, all of that. So that relationship ended up ending, as I'm sure we could all foresee, because I was just a delightful girlfriend. Um, Not to diminish myself, but yeah, that ended. And I ended up, yeah, moving in with my brother at that point. And shortly thereafter, I turned 21. So now I'm able to drink legally, and I did not waste a freaking minute. I feel like the second I turned 21, I was over drinking. And I believe at the time it just kind of seemed like, well, this is what you do when you're 21. So, despite the fact that I was working multiple jobs and maybe going to school, I think at that point I was just working 2 or 3 jobs. I wasn't taking any classes at that point. Um, but man, I made drinking my number one priority right away. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think if there was ever a time from the time I turned 21 after that I was would have been considered anything other than a heavy drinker. And I don't think so. I think right out of the gate, I was a heavy drinker. So I got, like, towards the end of my year of as 21, I believe it was in the springtime. Oh yeah, my roommates were on spring break. So it was during the spring, and I'm just coming up on 22. That is when I got my first DUI. So I was living in Sacramento at the time, and when you're 21 and you get a DUI, and I was working in restaurants, it seemed like a really common thing to happen. And it was really easy for me to brush off taking accountability for that because of other instances that were very much facts with that, which was 2 male officers that sexually harassed me during the arrest. They lied. They said I was doing 70 miles an hour going uphill in a 3-cylinder Geo Metro. Love to see how that one checks out in court. Had I known, I could have fought that, or even like yeah, even fought for myself in any way at that point. I know that those officers knew that fear was going to keep me from doing that, and they were right. I was terrified, and so I never said a word. And back in the 90s, they didn't do all the recording that they do these days, so I'm sure that that was just those 2 officers. That was their game. Very much harassing young women. So I held on to that, like, for dear life. Fuck the police. Fuck the police. They are corrupt as fuck. That was my first experience with them. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. The police are just running amok. And that's been, so a lot of times people look at me and they're like, where did this girl get this fuck the police mentality? It looks like the cops would be working for me, or like, I wouldn't have those problems. But no, I held on to that story hardcore. So, and I've done a lot of growth now. I understand now that officers of the law are people, and they are just learning their own lessons and playing out their own personal wounds. So, um, yeah, but that's not always pretty. And I just held on to that. And that was what, for me, made it a lot easier to dismiss any accountability. It was like, oh, that wasn't my fault. That was just the corrupt law enforcement, obviously. So no fault of my own, full permission to continue drinking as I had been, and just continue living my life as I was living it. So super heavy drinker. I often worked in restaurants. And so actually I did like 12 years. I talk about working in restaurants like I do doing time. I did 12 years of customer service in a restaurant industry. Like, oh my God. But it's a um, very easy environment to continue drinking heavily and no one blink an eye at it. So that was pretty much my life. And then, my mid 20s is when I met my now ex-husband, but I picked him up in a bar, like like lines up perfectly well with my story. But I did pick up my ex-husband in a bar, and we were together for 20 years. And yeah, I was always a heavy drinker through that, while he was not really. It was, I think back and it's like, God, I poor guy. I like married my designated driver essentially. But and thank God for him. If it were not for him, I probably would be dead. Um, but yeah, I was always a heavy drinker, and my hangovers were constant and normal. And it the constant hangovers for me made it to where, like, if I was ever legitimately sick, like actually sick, this sense of shame would come up for me, because it was like most I was so used to being sick, but knowing I'd caused it myself. And I'm still very much working through that, and I still have a hard time nowadays being sober. If I get sick, I'm like, I get so like just overwhelmed with shame for being sick. And it's like, wait, I didn't do this to myself this time. I really have to remind myself and create that new neural pathway that, hey, it's okay to be sick and take care of yourself. The just damage I did to myself from years of drinking myself slowly to death. So all of that caught up with me. And let's see. So as far as my where I was located. So not that it necessarily matters, but yeah, met my husband around 25. We didn't get married until 5 years later. So when we were still dating, then we moved in together, and then we moved to Montana, which is where his family is based. And yeah, I just continued the heavy drinking. And honestly, moving to Montana and being able to like use football Sunday as like an excuse to just day drink all day long. That was, oh my God, that was like my favorite thing to do, was just like day drink, like all day drink. That was always the thing I was looking to do. So um yeah, God, I can't imagine that was ever wonderful for my ex-husband. And God, trying not to resent myself too much for all of that. But what's done is done. Anyways, so we lived in Montana. We lived there for, I want to say, like 8 or 9 years. Um, yeah, something like that. And then in 2012, my husband got a job out in California, in Humboldt, which is where I'm still at, Eureka, California. But he got a job out here growing weed. And I big fan of weed, big fan of drinking. And so at the time I was working for a bank, and most of my job it was customer service, but most of my job consisted of angry people barking at me on the phone all day long. It was not a fun job. Um, so just a lot of stress. And but also met some amazing people there. So shout out to my Wells Fargo peeps. But I when I heard that there was this opportunity to come back out to California, and of all things, like live on a pot farm, I was like, okay, this seems fake. First of all, it sounds totally fake, but I'm in. Let's do it. I wasn't quite sure, because we had just finished remodeling the house, right? And so I got the house exactly as I wanted it. And he came back from California. He had come out to work for just a little bit and work in the cannabis industry. And then he came back with enough money to pay off all of our debts and get us in the black. And it was like, well, I have a job. Let's put our house on the market and see what happens. And we sold our house within the month with a cash offer for our asking price. It was like, okay, the stars have aligned. We're moving back to California. So that's how we got back to Cali after staying in Montana for a while. We didn't get frozen to the ground there. I was sometimes convinced was going to happen. But so when we made that move, and I got to give up this super stressful job, like uh, my a day in the life of me, aside from like drinking all day on the days I was off, was going to work, feeling freaking miserable in my job, but then coming home and just drinking to numb my day away, because it was super stressful. And I used that as an excuse. Although, let's be real, I didn't need an excuse. I was going to do that anyway. So, yeah, this idea to move out to California and not have this super stressful job, and actually get to like be surrounded by unlimited supplies of weed, I was like, okay, sign me up. Let's do this. I need to get the hell out of here. So, yeah, we jumped on it. We did that, moved out here. We lived completely off the grid for 4 years. 3.5, 4 years, which was huge. Going from a house that had all the amenities I could ever wanted to living completely off the grid, being like the only female in a 5 mile radius, that was insane and intense. We didn't even have a bathroom for the first few years I lived there. Oh my God, I can't believe I did that. But it was that idea of getting rid of this stressful job and being able to just like smoke weed all day and drink, let's do that. So it felt like the reprieve I was needing. So and what it turned out to be was um I that opportunity to drink and smoke like I wanted to was really just forcing my rock bottom to come into fruition. Like that was really the magical combination for me, if you will. So yeah, fast forward to 2015, and this was a few seasons. What we were doing is we were working on the mountain. I say we working, no, my ex-husband was working his ass off and I would kind of help out here and there once in a while when he needed me. I would do some hourly work bouncing around to other farms, mostly trim work, things like that. And then when trim season came, that was my time to like work the long days, but I bitched about it the entire time. I was never really happy about that. And I realized as like we would come closer to trim season, I would create these circumstances where I was out of commission. So a few years of doing this where we worked on the mountain from April through November or whenever we could get the season to wrap up. And then my ex and I, we would take off and we would go travel. And we got to travel all through Southeast Asia. Freaking amazing. Like Thailand still holds a very special place in my heart. Just amazing travels. I would never, I would not take that back for the world. And the last year we got to do a major bucket list trip through South America and the Galapagos Islands and Belize. It was magical times, but also really stressful times. So 2015, and we'd been doing this on the mountain I was there for 3 seasons. So my ex had been doing that for 4 seasons at that point. And it was coming up on trim season. And I ended up drinking and partying myself into the hospital with pancreatitis. And yeah, I was in the ICU for 5 days, almost drinking myself to death. And yeah, that was, you would think, a wake up call. You would think that I would learn, oh shit, I've got to stop drinking. But did I? No, no, no. I remember getting discharged from the hospital, having to go onto the mountain because we lived off the grid at that time and just in this really cold trailer. Although my ex had me hooked up with a really nice heater, things like that. It was as cushy as it could possibly be for the circumstances. But I remember that I wasn't allowed to drink for 30 days. And so I sat in this freaking trailer just fuming with rage and counting down the days because everybody else was allowed to drink. And sure, I was still smoking tons of weed. In fact, the doctor was like, yeah, that's fine. Do that. It's probably going to help you at this point, but no alcohol. In fact, I was on a liquid only diet. And I remember being so mad. There was one day everyone was having barbecued chicken, and I was so angry because I couldn't have chicken. But mostly it was the alcohol. I wanted freaking alcohol. And I didn't even make it the 30 days like I'd promised my husband and the doctor. I think I made it to like 26, 27 days. And then I started going down to the cabin and snagging beers out of the refrigerator. So, and I was sneaky about it too. It wasn't, there was always this level of dishonesty to it that, just doesn't sit. Like it just feels so icky in my skin now. And like, to anybody who's worked their program in AA or like whatever program, anything, or just any spiritual awakening, when you get to this point of recognizing that true joy is just living with rigorous honesty and being fully authentically yourself. Even when I think back to those times when I was being sneaky and not being fully honest, it makes my tummy hurt. And so just revisiting those moments is like, ew, oh, I don't like that. um Man, I've done a lot of growing since then. So but yeah, so that was 2015 that I hospitalized, like practically drinking myself to death, and I did not learn. So fast forward another year, and at this point, after that incident, it was becoming really obvious and very obvious to my husband at the time that I wasn't doing well on the off-grid situation, and we needed to get a place to live. So the traveling ended at the end of that season, and we found a place to live on the coast, here in northern Humboldt. And yeah, so things kind of changed. It was no longer that nomadic lifestyle of just kind of living in this unfinished cabin, nothing really belonging to you, everything just getting kind of trashed if it did, and then backpacking with only what will fit in a carry-on backpack, and really got to create a home again for myself. So although it wasn't the big house, it was a little apartment, but that ended up being my home for 7 years, and loved the heck out of that space. But that was the decision that needed to happen, and I'm really relieved that it did. Although what that essentially meant was that instead of just living off the grid, where you can just drink, party, whatever, the consequences seem less because there's nobody around, right? But once I moved down to the coast, I was having to make these constant trips back and forth up Highway 299, up along the Trinity River. Anybody knows that highway knows it is a very windy, treacherous drive, particularly if you're driving it intoxicated. It is dangerous. So here we are, 2016, and that is when I wrapped my Subaru, my beloved Subaru. I wrapped her around a tree and broke my neck. Amazed that I didn't die. And if that tree hadn't stopped me, I would have gone off a pretty steep embankment. I don't know that anyone would have found me for quite some time. That tree saved me. My Subaru saved me. Yeah, I was over 3 times the legal limit that day. And it was in the afternoon. It was in the freaking afternoon, like the sun was not even down. But wouldn't you know, it was the day before we started our big trim scene, which is when I was actually supposed to help my husband working. And that was I suppose, my energetic way of bowing out of the trim season, if you will. Because again, I was in the hospital. And this time they life flighted me over to Reading, only to have basically make my husband drive 3 extra hours on his probably busiest work day of the year to come pick me up in Reading. Oh, and add an extra trip to go buy me a new phone, which was shattered in my wreck because I was, of course, texting and driving. Yeah, just such a blessing. Nobody else was involved in that incident, only myself. And of course, the collateral damage of everybody in my life. So that incident, I vowed to my husband that was it. I was done. I was done. So knew that I had to quit drinking, and that was it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it, right? So I ended up staying sober for, I want to say, maybe 4.5 months, something like that. I was going to AA. I was walking down to these little AA meetings in my neighborhood with my full neck brace and totally beat up, battered up. But I didn't have a sponsor. I wasn't working the program. I was smoking weed. I didn't really have an idea of what the program was, but I was going to the meetings every day. So I was at least showing up. I wasn't drinking. So, but then the end of that year happened, and when the season ended, we ended up going on a 15-day cruise to Hawaii. Actually, it was like to Ensenada first and then to Hawaii. Well, on this cruise, we ended up getting the unlimited drink package, and the agreement, I believe, that was made with my husband and I was, what happens on the water stays on the water. And I'd be willing to bet I'm the one that threw this out there. I don't really remember how the deets went down with that, but that is where my 4 years, or my phase of controlled or responsible drinking, began. And it did look very responsible on the outside, but on the inside, I was obsessed with, is it time for me to open a bottle of wine yet? Every goddamn day. Is it time for me to open wine yet? Anytime we were going to go out to do anything, my suggestion would always be to go somewhere where there was definitely going to be alcohol. Didn't matter what time of day, that was my biggest priority. So I wouldn't say that like I'm a very manipulative person, but when I think on those times and it came to like say there was a sandwich shop that had my husband's favorite sandwich, or there was the same old ho hum brewery food, I am going to be adamant that I want to go to the brewery even though the food is worse because I can get a beer. So those types of things. It wasn't meant to be hurtful, but yeah, there was definitely manipulations involved in making sure I could drink. So that was kind of my life for a while. But during that time, I was able to put aside my addiction for a while and go to herbal school, which was another thing I learned when I was during that time when I was up off the grid, spending time just with nature. I learned that I can in fact connect with plant spirit, and you would think it'd be cannabis. You would think that was the one, but no, it was actually a lavender bush that I really connected with up there. So um, found this passion for plants, and there I learned that there was an herbal school 10 minutes away from my house that I just needed to be a part of. So I my husband said, do it, if this is going to make you happy, do it. So I got to not worry about anything going on in the mountain, and I threw myself into school for a full year and got clinically certified as an herbalist. And during that time, I remember there'd be times that it was like the first time for a while that I wasn't thinking about drinking, but I was kind of obsessive about school. So that's where I could kind of see that teenage pre-addict in me, if you will, like just that need for validation and almost addicted to the knowledge. Um, but while it looked very healthy on the outside, I don't know how healthy it was on the inside, but I certainly did throw myself completely into school, and I'm really glad I did. It's still it's my business. I love it. I love working with plant medicine. So that was very much a blessing. Although I wasn't doing the work on myself mentally. So as far as dealing with any of my addictions, addressing any of my issues that are behind that. So now fast forward, and it is June of 2020. So we are in the pandemic. Oh my God. I think we all remember what that was like, right? Like we're June of 2020, we're like 3 or 4 months into like solid lockdown, right? There's I know that there was a curfew in effect, at least in the Sacramento area, there was a curfew in effect. And well, this is the time both of my grandparents, who were alive at the time, were in a nursing home, and their birthdays were 3 days apart. So grandma was turning 89, grandpa was turning 90. And there was going to be this, my whole family was like throwing this socially distanced party for them, where like we bring all the little ones, all the kids, and everybody from a distance can bring them a cake and say we love them, all of that stuff. So that's a 6-hour drive for me to go down to Sac. And I was like, okay, I'm doing this. My grandparents' birthday. I got to do this. And my ex was like, this is a terrible idea. No. And it's June. So for him, that was prime working season. There was no way he was taking time off to be able to do that. So it's like, I'm just going to go by myself. I'm going to stay with my parents. Again, he's like, I don't recommend that. It's not a great idea, but I did it anyway. So, and it was June 4th of 2020. And I remember it was the full moon. And I drove down from Sacramento, or I drove down to Sacramento from McKinleyville, where I was at. And it wasn't long into having dinner with my parents that a alcohol infused argument broke out. And I was like, oh, forget this. And I got in my car, drove away. I'm getting a hotel. I'll do the party thing. I'm getting a hotel, and then I will drive home after that. I'm not dealing with this anymore. So I get in my car, and it is at this point after curfew. There's like nobody out and about. If you guys remember what full lockdown and COVID was, but it's just the same. I'm like, I'm taking the back road. I'm going through the industrial way. I'm not taking any chances, and I don't want to be on Folsom Boulevard with all the freaking lights. I'm like, no. I'm avoiding that. I'm going around. So, I I get to maybe like less than 5 minutes from my parents' house. I'm going to say 3 minutes from my parents' house. And I'm sobbing. I just had this major breakdown with my parents and just bawling my eyes out, trying to think, okay, which hotel do I want to go to? There's a whole group of them over here, whatever. And I am stopped at a light and changed my mind to get one lane over and turn left to go instead of going straight at this light, just depending on where I was. And that moment I got T-boned by an off-duty police officer. So I and no brakes. I took a battering ram of a cop car going about 40 miles an hour to my right side. Again, in a Subaru, you guys, Subarus freaking save lives. That is not a joke. And of course, that commercial was on the whole time I'm in the hospital, but um, Subarus save lives. I can't wait to get another one. Oh my God. Yeah, there is no way I should have walked away from this accident. No freaking way. But I did. And very minimal damage to myself. However, that officer did sustain a back injury during that accident. So what my record shows is that I have injured a police officer. And yeah, I of course went straight to jail. Yeah, straight to jail with a $50,000 bond. That was a fun phone call to be making to my husband at like 2 or 3 in the morning. That was a freaking nightmare. And I can't help but give gratitude and thanks to this woman that was locked up the same night as me, super high on meth, and she taught me how to use the phone system. She was very familiar with, because I couldn't figure it out and no one would help me. It was one of the most terrifying nights of my life. Yeah, and I remember like after just sitting in jail, and I had already promised my husband that was it, like 4 years prior, that was it, I'm never doing this again. He had warned me against even going on this trip, and here I was. And yeah, the fear that came along with that, like, oh, that's it, when I come home he'll be gone. My whole life just was crashing, and I knew it, and I knew it was my fault, and there was really no going back at that point. So yeah, all of that, I was able to get bailed out and all of that. Yeah, we put it all on our freaking credit card. Oh my God, that was so stressful. So, but the next morning my brother came and picked me up from jail first thing in the morning. I had been kind of trying to call. I think he already kind of knew something was up. So he was like ready and waiting, came to pick me up. And wouldn't you know, like sure enough, right after we leaving that situation, I believe we went pretty immediately and picked up some like tall Mike's Hard Lemonades. Because in my mind at that point, I was like, that officer hit me again, the same thing. You'll notice a pattern. I was like, that was not my fault. What the hell? Yeah, it took me a while to wrap my brain around the fact that I still needed to quit drinking, because it was like, no, that wasn't my fault. This isn't my own doing. So about a month and a week later, actually exactly a month and a week later, because it was on the 3/4 moon, maybe 2 days before that. I'm very into the moon cycles. You'll get to learn. But so on the night of July 9th, so just over a month after the accident, I had a dream, and it was my father-in-law who had passed away and that I was very close to in Montana. And we'd had a falling out over the whole, when Trump was elected, the way people were cheering that man on. I let go of that relationship and I walked away from it because I was traumatized. And what I now know with lots of therapy, that I was reliving my rape when people were cheering on Donald Trump in my face. And that included my family members, that included people putting memes on social media if I ever attacked you at that point. My apologies for the attack, not for what it stood like I still believe and fully know the energy behind that man and what he brought to our country, but that's a whole separate thing. I'm not going to go down that road. But the trauma I was reliving is a world that can look at a woman being assaulted and look away like it's not my problem. And you had it coming, you brought this on yourself. That mentality caused me to end that relationship. And I felt terrible about it. In fact, the way I handled what was happening with our world and the things going on around me, the way I handled my trauma during those 4 years, I responded by unleashing my own trauma on anyone close to me. I was um an angry animal locked in a cage, just screaming. I wanted to rip faces off of people, and I reacted as such. And that ended this relationship with my father-in-law. Well, I guess now would have been my ex-father-in-law, but he passed away at the beginning of 2020, and he passed away quickly. And my ex told me I could not go because of the way I was going to be around the right wing side of his family. I couldn't do it. I was going to rip off faces. So he was smart to say that I should not go, and I did not. But he meant a lot to me. That relationship meant a lot to me, and I hold a lot of resentment towards myself over not being able to work through my trauma sooner to be able to attend his memorial service. But that's not the way things shook out. So I had a dream, and he came to me in my dream, and he said, "We have your team of guides." Oh, I'm getting so emotional. Wow, I didn't expect this. So I had this dream, and his name is Eldon. He came to me in this dream, and he said, "We are trying to talk to you. There's a whole team of guides. We're trying to talk to you, and you're fogging yourself with alcohol. You got to put down the alcohol so we can have this conversation. I've got you. I'm here with you, and I've got you. It's going to be a crazy ride, but I've got you." And that was the gist of the dream. And it was the most powerful dream I had ever had in my life. So the morning of July 10th, I woke up and I told my husband, and I said, "This is it. This is the last day I'm drinking." I still had wine from the day before. And it was like, I'm not going to throw that away. That'd be ridiculous, right? Um, and I told him, and he was kind of like, "Okay, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, you know." And the following day, July 11th, was my father-in-law's birthday. And so that was a very significant day for me, July 11th. And my sober birthday is July 11th of 2020. So just over 3 years ago, just recently celebrated 42 moon cycles alcohol free. And yeah, I have that dream to thank. That was the ass kicking I needed from the universe to like, wake the fuck up, Jennifer. We're trying to get your attention and you are clouding yourself. So um God, forever grateful for that. And my spiritual connection, my connection to my higher self, my guides, my freaking guide team, which is enormous. That connection has just continued to get stronger with more clarity. So, and that's certainly what's led me to where I am now. Like I mentioned, I got to go through school and get certified as I'm a clinically certified herbalist, and I am now also a Reiki master, and now getting into sound healing. So all kinds of branches of the healing tree that I'm really diving into and learning so much about myself and healing so much of myself, learning what it was that I was trying to numb. All of this stuff I was trying to numb. And yet at the end of it all, I managed to get sober during the Trump administration and a global pandemic. Holy shit. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. So um pretty powerful stuff. And now that I am getting better at just harnessing in or reining in this connection with spirit, with my guides, with my higher self, my passion has become trying to hold the hand of other people doing the same thing on different legs of a very similar journey, or different. I mean, let's be real. Our journeys are all so different and unique and beautiful. But we're all here to help each other, and helping each other by sharing and sharing what we're learning, what we're growing through, what we've overcome is so important. So, and I feel like every time for myself that I talk about these things and I put this out there, a little bit of that shame that's attached to it goes away, because it's like, oh, that wasn't so hard. That's not so scary. This is still just me. And those are lessons that I've had to learn, lessons that I chose as a spiritual being to learn in this incarnation. And I'm still learning, I'm still growing, but I'm doing it with a clear head now. And damn it, it is awesome. Um, so yeah, that dream, July 9th of 2020, changed my freaking life. And I am so grateful and honored to be in touch with my spirit team that are guiding me along on this path now. And um yeah, this is I'm trying to think if there's anything after that dream. And once I got that moment of clarity, oh well, yeah, there's a little more I can talk about. So the first 4 months, I wasn't working a program. It was simply that dream. And there were some other psychic messages that had been coming through prior to that I was working through with my therapist that had assured me if these messages coming through were not to harm myself or harm others, then these are valid. Listen to these psychic messages. And those messages were coming to me through a stuffed Finding Nemo doll that I found in a free pile across the street from my apartment. And I call him Shark Bait now. He is actually, I should have brought him here to share. I'm going to have to do that at some point. He is all dressed up as a little pig for Halloween. He's freaking adorable. But now I have a whole crew. And as it turns out, my little plushy crew represent me at different ages that need healing, my inner child self that need healing. But this little fish, Shark Bait, who's perfectly huggable, and a really good soaker upper of tears, if you will, for about 4 months. And I was terrified of my legal situation, going back to jail, doing hard time, all of that just terrified the crap out of me. Knowing that my husband had one foot out the door, that had me terrified as well. What is I going to do? I didn't have a car or license. How can I work? What can I do? All of the unknown. I was terrified. So me and Shark Bait sat in front of my little altar space in my living room, and I bawled my eyes out for about 4 months. Just doing the things, getting up, getting dressed, going out to get groceries. Those things were, that was about all I could do for a while. And then I learned through my therapist that that I'd found this therapist who I like, so lucky, and I love how the universe works out. I did not know that she was a drug and alcohol therapist. I went to her when my husband said, "You cannot go to Eldon's memorial service because of this rage that you were holding. Use this money for your ticket and go get therapy." And she was the only therapist available. And yeah, it turns out she was a drug and alcohol therapist as well and helped me through so much. But she is the one that informed me with the charges that I was looking at that I was likely going to do hard time if I didn't start proving that I was going to AA. And I was like, oh God, here we go. But it was a pandemic, so they'd closed down the in-person meetings. So I found my AA family on Zoom, and I went to the my AA peeps, my home group, my crew is the AAE USA group. And you can find that just if you type in AA group, I think it's like USA. I'll have to look it up. And I'll promise I will leave a link on the description on this for that meeting, because it's an amazing group of people. They are my home group. They those people changed my goddamn life. And I'm so freaking grateful for all of them. In fact, gave me the first few opportunities to share this story. So I really have that family to thank for this as well. So and learning how to like just be honest with myself, working that 12-step program was like the first time that I got to really look at myself honestly and just in a safe space, own up to my shit. So yeah, freaking grateful for that. And so it wasn't long after joining that group, I believe it was in November, that I found my AA group on, yeah, just through Zoom. And then it wasn't very long after that I got my first sponsor, and freaking lifesaver, actually working the steps, really getting to understand this tool that, or as I like to say, jewels in my jewelry box, but these blingy jewels on how to navigate life honestly and being authentically myself. What a gift. What an amazing gift. And I will always cherish it. I will say my attendance at AA meetings lately, not so much. Sometimes I will pop on if somebody's sharing their story and I want to just encourage them. But for myself, going on a daily basis, it wasn't really vibing with me anymore. But I'm starting to realize that once those steps just become a part of how you live, um, really sitting in that version of the person of who I was just doesn't feel as good to me anymore because I've moved on from that. And that's okay. That's totally okay. There's so many programs out there, so many things available. I now I participate in a local group which we meet in person. It's a seeking sobriety, and we all meet at the Crystalline Collective Yoga Studio in Arcata. And I love that group. There is meditation involved, which is very much my jam, a very like a Dharma-esque vibe going on there. And we draw oracle card, which is also so my jam. And it's very encouraging for people who are in any stage in their sobriety or sober curiosity, which I really like. It really is what's encouraged in this group, in this that I am now partaking in. So I think it's really important to make sure that I'm surrounding myself with people who understand what it is to be an addict, what it is to overcome that, and yeah, be conscious of living to make better choices every day. So that's where I'm at now, and I'm thrilled to be able to say that I'm over 3 years sober. That's freaking crazy. And all the beautiful things that have opened up in my life since then, including this. This has been a dream of mine for a while, and I'm so glad that Radiant Spirit has now come to fruition in the form of a podcast. How freaking cool is that? So, yeah, without getting too much into anything else, I feel like I've shared quite a bit of my juicy story. So, as far as the legal outcomes and what is going on. So as of now, and yes, this is 3.5 years after my incident of that, the night of the accident, I am still a lost. I am multiple numbers or lost number in a broken system. I am very reluctant to talk about my case as it is still open and nobody really knows what's going on, whether it be Sacramento County, Humboldt County. Nobody knows anything, and everyone I talk to has a completely different answer that conflicts with what the previous person told me. So, for fear of jinxing what has already been a very frustrating and yeah, we're just going to say frustrating process, maybe hopefully down the road I'll be able to do a whole episode of what it is to be just stuck in a completely broken system. We'll get to that, but pardon me, had to cough. But yes, I am hoping that I will be in a place soon to be able to talk about what the whole legal aspect has been. But all this has really done is prove to me beyond a shadow of a doubt that our justice system is broken, beyond repair. Not sure what can be saved of it. And that's all I need to say about that for now. It's really frustrating to think about. So we're not going to dwell on it. But yeah, I am here. I have everything I need. I fortunately did not have to do any hard time. Whew, thank goodness. I'm not sure what that would have done to me, but I am surrounded by magic. I'm surrounded by abundance and sobriety. That was the key for me. That was the key. So really learning how to look at myself and work through my trauma, working through it and still working through it, still a work in progress. But aren't we all? yeah, I think that is really all I have to say about my story. I'm just kind of taking my time um, in case there's anything I'm thinking of that I kind of brushed over or forgot, but I don't believe that there is. So, on that note, thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. I'm sure there'll be more to come, but I would love to take us out with the track that I started playing at the very beginning, MC Yogi Triumphant. And this jam really makes me feel all the feels about what my story's been, what this journey has been. So, yeah, enjoy, you guys. MC Yogi with Triumphant. And thanks so much for joining me for Radiant Spirit today. Much love.
Of a lion that can be tamed. I got the blood of a champion in my veins. And if I fall, I'm gonna get up again. I will be triumphant.
Let the drum kick sound every trumpet. I will never forfeit, I will be triumphant. Triumphant, triumphant. Fists in the sky, yeah, let me see you pump it now. You hear the sound, crowds going wild. I'm taking on the crown, inside of my chest I can feel my heart pound. I'ma stand my ground, I will never back down.
I got the heart of a lion that can be tamed. I got the blood of a champion in my veins. And if I fall, I'm gonna get up again. I will be triumphant.
All I got, I'm gonna give it all I got, yeah. All I got, I'm gonna give it all I got. Cause there's a fire inside that can never be diminished. It can never be destroyed, it can never be extinguished. To this flame, everything I relinquish. To this flame, my strength and my commitment. Fan the flame, feel it shining in my bones. Fan the flame, feel it shining in my soul. Fan the flame, feel it rise, feel it grow. With the spotlight shine from the center of my
I
soul.
got the heart of a lion that can